In 2012, NASA received a pretty strange gift. A pair of telescopes donated by the National Reconnaissance Office, also known as the NRO, or more accurately, America's Secret Space Agency. Established in '61 but kept a state secret for 30 years, the NRO's work can probably be best summed up with the two words, spy satellites. And so, as you can imagine, what they donated to NASA was pretty interesting. The two telescopes were built in the 90s, but have been gathering dust on a shelf ever since. This made it all the more amazing that when the NASA scientists got a look at them, they were ecstatic to find that despite their age and hand-me-down status, the telescopes were more advanced than the Hubble Space Telescope. Another interesting feature was that, judging by their short focal length, they had been designed to look at Earth, not space. This story fits with a pretty widespread idea that military technology is decades ahead of what we civilians can get our grubby little mitts on. But while that's become at least less true than it used to be, I think that we all, to some degree, understand that whenever there's a new technological breakthrough, someone with a bunch of medals pinned above their left breast pocket chomping on a cigar is gonna hear about it long before Marquez Brownlee does. And so, isn't it kind of weird how no one ever really seems to bring that up? Like, it seems like tech has never been more of a mainstream issue than it is today.
I think as the personalization loop kicks in and the AI just starts to get to know you better and better.
I still expect that there will be some change required to the social contract.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would.
Can you imagine to off to something a robot made? You're like a traitor to the human race. No disrespect.
The average American, I think it's fewer than 3 friends. And the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think it's like 15 friends.
No skin or hair or flesh or breath or heat. Just chrome. Just and smart rocks going click, 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 click.
And yet, despite that, throughout all of this, what is probably the single biggest influence on not even just the computer industry, but computing as a whole, seems to be allowed to stay out of sight, just like those spy telescopes. And so, we're not going to do that here. This isn't going to be another video making fun of generative slop, debating about plagiarism, or making self-serving arguments about how AI will never be able to reproduce the artistic magic of a 2-hour-long YouTube video essay. Sorry, did I say artistic? I meant autistic. No, instead, we're going to aim our telescopes straight down to look at the ties between computers and the military that run through all of computing, and therefore, our world. A company that would very much agree with me here is one that's been in the news a lot lately. Palantir, who were recently tapped by Trump to create a unified database of all Americans. It's just like Facebook, but you don't even have to open an account yourself. Is that really so bad? Now, to be fair here, what's actually going on is that in March 2025, Trump signed an executive order for government agencies to share all unclassified information in a master database. This does raise some pretty big concerns for privacy and security, but with that said, it's not exactly 1984 either. But I think it's safe to say that a big part of the reason why people are freaking out over this probably isn't just the database itself, but also the company that's been put in charge of it. Palantir, named with an odd amount of self-awareness after the evil seeing stones from Lord of the Rings, is a CIA-backed data analytics company founded by Peter Thiel, a shady Epstein-affiliated billionaire known to consume the blood of children to stay young, and most damningly of all, his name is an anagram for the reptile. But let's be real, that describes like half of Trump's orbiters. While we'll come back to Thiel later, for the most part, I'm gonna be more focused on Palantir's co-founder and CEO, Alexander Karp. See, while I'm no defender of this freak-faced wizard, he isn't really the main guy pulling the strings. And so, if we want to understand why people should be worried about Palantir in a way that goes beyond conspiracy theories about the company's name or Thiel's penchant for adrenochrome infusions, then the best way to do that would probably be by listening to, honestly, just anything that Alex Karp says.
I don't think in win-lose. I think in domination.
Safe means that the other person is scared. That's how you make someone safe.
The obvious solution to war is to have the West having the strongest, most precise, deadly weapons possible.
Bad times mean strong finances internally.
One of the most...
How dare you!
Okay.
How dare you! Your AI and your technology from Palantir kills Palestinians!
Mostly terrorists, that's true.
I think a lot of the things that we provide maybe shouldn't be built.
I love the idea of getting a drone and having light fentanyl-laced urine spraying on analysts who tried to screw us.
Yeah, I could definitely see why some people might feel weird about this guy. So the reason why Karp's talking like Hank Scorpio there is because while Palantir is at its core basically just a data analytics company involved in lots of different industries, the thing that they're most known for is their work developing AI weapons.
Our product is used on occasion to kill people.
Now, a general rule with AI companies is that they all love to lie about how dangerous their products are as a way of hyping them up. Like, if the CEO is saying that he thinks that his company's latest model is likely to rise up and eradicate humanity, like the virus that we are, then the reasonable assumption to make isn't that the world's about to end, but that this new diffusion model is going to make some top-notch Masato Katsuragi hentai, which, to be clear, is still cause for alarm. He who controls the hentai controls the future. Is it just me, or does anyone else think that it's bad that what could quite possibly be the most important technology of our time is being handled by guys who all regularly pull shit like that? And in the case of Palantir, while, as I'll be covering, they absolutely do plenty of scary shit, they're also not an exception to this rule. Although, a lot of times, the way that Alex Karp will hype them up is incredibly strange. For example, Alex loves bringing up a classified military operation that he's not allowed to talk about while aggressively hinting that he's referring to killing Osama bin Laden.
Maybe not for everything we've done, but for some of the new things.
Well, a lot of things we've done can never be publicized. And I do in some ways wish they were more well known.
Did your company help to track and kill Osama bin Laden?
You know, we can never. I'll tell you, the closest thing to an answer is like there are when you look at when you open the paper and look in the news about these kind of things, there's a 2/3 chance, depending on the country involved, that somehow my company was involved.
Well, I can't say who, but let's just say I'd rate his death a 9 out of 11. Wink. Or even stranger, he loves bringing up Palantir's work integrating AI into kill chains, presumably because it sounds really cool and badass. And to be fair here, they do actually do that. But also, when he brings it up, he says that
you have created the system which you call kill chain.
Privately. Publicly, the lawyers have some innocuous something like tech for the amelioration of unwanted blah, blah, blah. Some term we're supposed to use.
Okay, let's...
for me, it's the kill chain.
Kill chain sounds good.
So, no, that's not true. Kill chains are a standard military term referring to the chain of events that need to take place between when the military spots a target and kills them. On top of this being just an incredibly strange lie, the use of AI to shorten these kill chains is one of the thorniest ethical issues that comes with AI weapons, and these guys never address it. Whenever Alex gets questioned about the ethics of using this stuff, he always just says that Russia or China or whoever will if the US doesn't, or, just gestures vaguely towards the concept of deterrence.
They will build them or we will build them. And currently we have enormous advantages.
You will get a better world, not a perfect world, but a better world by making Western institutions, especially the United States of America, stronger, especially on the battlefield.
You know what we're doing in the DoD? We're scaring the bejeebers, I'm trying not to use the F word, out of our adversaries by making them scared at night.
Same goes for this guy, Palmer Luckey, who founded another AI weapons company called Andrew, and looks like he says, "Do you know who my father is?" when he's losing a game of Magic cards. Judge, my father's fraternity is very connected. But the thing is that while you can, I suppose, have a reasonable debate about any of these issues with regards to any new military technology, they don't actually get at what makes AI meaningfully different. Regardless of what these bug people say, AI, or any autonomous weapon systems, aren't the same as just a better camera or more precise missile. When AI is, for example, used to shorten a kill chain, that means that the decision of whether or not a real person should die is being offloaded to an algorithm's black box, something that, as you'll see, affects all of us. To understand how we got here, though, let's take things back to the beginning of computers. While, as you'll be seeing throughout this video, computing is a very big concept, and so there's no way to pin the blame for this nightmare we can't log out of on any single person. But one suspect who I think deserves to be in the running for the crime of creating computing was a guy named Lewis Fry Richardson. Born in England in 1881, Richardson was a Quaker and therefore a pacifist, and so rather than joining the meat grinder of World War I with the rest of his countrymen, he worked as a medic on the front lines. But during his time off, Richardson was focused on something far more engaging than patching up the mortally wounded in the war to end all wars: the weather. Specifically, he was looking for a mathematical way of predicting it. Richardson began collecting all of the recorded weather data in Europe and, using any free time he had, crunched the numbers with pen and paper, trying to discover a pattern. He published his findings in the 1922 book Weather Predictions by Numerical Process, and while his predictions were wrong, he came close enough to demonstrate that this could theoretically be done, provided that you had enough data and could analyze it fast enough. Towards the end of his book, Richardson describes what he thought a way of calculating all the weather on Earth might look like. He proposed a massive theater filled with computers, which at the time was a job, not a machine. Richardson described this massive computing theater almost like a symphony, or perhaps like a rough approximation of computing architecture.
Each computer attends only to one equation or part of an equation. The work of each region is coordinated by an official of higher rank. Numerous little night signs display the instantaneous values so that neighboring computers can read them. From the floor of the pit, a tall pillar rises to the height of the hall. It carries a large pulpit on its top. In it sits the man in charge of the whole theatre. He is surrounded by several assistants and messengers. One of his duties is to maintain a uniform speed of progress in all parts of the globe. In this respect, he is like the conductor of an orchestra in which the instruments are slide rules and calculating machines. 4 senior clerks in the central pulpit are collecting the future weather as fast as it is being computed and dispatching it by pneumatic carrier to a quiet room. There it will be coded and telephoned to the radio transmitting station. Messengers carry piles of used computing forms down to a storehouse in the cellar. In another building are all the usual financial, correspondence, and administrative offices. Outside are playing fields, houses, mountains, and lakes, for it was thought that those who compute the weather should breathe of it freely.
Richardson never realized his dream. After the war, he joined the meteorological office, but in keeping with his pacifist principles, quit in 1920 when it was taken over by the Air Ministry for Military Research. But one world war later and an ocean away, Richardson's dream was taken up again by a different set of scientists who didn't share his ideological convictions. This began in 1931 when the American engineer Vannevar Bush built the first analog computer at MIT, using gears and punch cards to compute various equations. 7 years later, Bush left MIT for a promising career in national defense, which would soon lead him to an administrative role overseeing the Manhattan Project. In 1945, the first ever general-purpose digital computer, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, or ENIAC, was built at the University of Pennsylvania and was quickly put to work eliminating food waste and redistributing resources to those who need. No, I'm kidding. ENIAC's only job was developing thermonuclear bombs. By the way, while we're talking about this generation of computers, something you may have heard is how back then a calculator was like the size of a room. That's not really true. Well, yeah, obviously these were extremely basic. They could definitely do a lot more than just long division. The reason for this myth goes back to 1948, when IBM completed their Selective Sequence Electronic Calculator, or SSEC, to compete with ENIAC. To do this, IBM decided to go with a more user-friendly approach. They called it a calculator because, again, computer was still a job, and one that IBM wanted to assure the public wouldn't be replaced. Kind of like how we don't call ChatGPT therapist yet. This friendly approach was visible in every part of SSEC. IBM built it inside a former clothing store with a big street-facing window, inviting the public to come look at it. SSEC's first use was to calculate the position of the moon to help NASA, but just like the name, this was all PR bullshit. NASA didn't even use the calculations it produced. Instead, after a couple weeks of favorable press coverage, all of SSEC's computing power was dedicated to solving a series of calculations codenamed Hippo that were being used for, you guessed it, developing thermonuclear bombs. Now, one of the people working on ENIAC was a guy named John von Neumann, a mathematician, engineer, physicist, and computer scientist. And as you can probably guess by the number of commas in that bio, von Neumann was widely considered to be one of the greatest geniuses of his time, at least in the field of mathematics. But in the years following the war, von Neumann got really interested in two things. The first was building hydrogen bombs that were light enough that they could be strapped to the back of an ICBM, a cause that he was the head cheerleader for in the US military, which, do you understand how insane you have to be if your problem with Eisenhower was that he wasn't making enough nuclear bombs? But his other interest was a bit more esoteric. Von Neumann was really into Richardson's work and eventually became obsessed with trying to find a way of using computers to predict and later control the weather. In a lecture he gave at Princeton in 1950, he claimed that once computers got good enough, all meteorological phenomena would be able to be divided into what he called unstable processes, i.e. ones that could be affected by humans, with, for example, a well-placed nuclear bomb, or else stable processes, meaning ones that couldn't. He then declared that, quote, all processes that are stable we shall predict. All processes that are unstable we shall control. And here we see all the pieces that have served as the underlying logic of computer development ever since. Taking massive amounts of data and using them, generally alongside the US military, for the purposes of prediction and control. But as I'll be arguing in this video, the rise of AI has made this far more dangerous and far more strange. These AI models run on data. The only way they can get better is by being fed more of it. They've already scraped the entire internet, and now AI companies are racing to find ways to get them into the physical world so they can continue to grow. The computers that are trying to predict and control our behavior also desperately need more and more access to it. The mathematician Harry Reid, one of the people who von Neumann worked on ENIAC with, wrote that
the ENIAC itself, strangely, was a very personal computer. Now, we think of a personal computer as one which you carry around with you. The ENIAC was actually one that you kind of lived inside. So instead of you holding a computer, this computer held you.
As James Bridel argues in his book New Dark Age, We are still living inside the computer. And just like with SSEC, while this all seems harmless and friendly, when you start looking for the wires and sensors, what you find is a very dark picture. This is most true when it comes to AI weapons, since in order to train them, they need active conflict. And that's what this video is going to be covering. Not just AI weapons, but also the logic that created and motivates them and the computer that we find ourselves in. With the digital cloud above us and fiber optic internet cables below, as our every thought and action is turned into training data, everything's computer. But before we get into that, some particularly perceptive viewers may notice that I'm currently packing my life into a bindle and I'm about to hit the dusty trail to start a new life a couple towns over under a different name. Why am I doing this? Well, yesterday I got a call from someone claiming they work for the government who told me that I need to send them 0.000068 of a Bitcoin to cover what I owe in taxes. And as a YouTuber, I'm pretty sure that they'll take away my silver play button if I ever catch up on paying those. So this is really my only option, is what I would have said if not for this video's sponsor, Incogni. So, good news and bad news, gang. The good news is that that guy didn't actually work for the Canadian government at all. You won't take me alive, Mark Carney! Bad news is that they were actually a scammer, but how'd they get my name and number? Well, turns out that if you're a person online, there's a decent chance that your personal information has made it into the hands of data brokers who will in turn sell it to anyone who wants it, including spammers, scammers, stalkers, and even me. So what can we do about it? Well, much like a demon, these data brokers are bound by certain rules that they must obey. One being that if you request your data be taken down, they have to comply. That's where Incogni comes in. When you sign up for an account, they automatically track down data brokers selling your information and issue takedown requests. And if you click the link in the description or go to incogni.com/inhell or use the promo code INHELL at checkout, you can get 60% off of an annual membership. And if that's still not enough for you, then check out Incogni's custom removals feature, where you can send them after any site that has your personal information, and one of their agents will take care of it, if you know what I mean. Available only through their unlimited plan and family unlimited plan. Turns out that 39 brokers had my data. If you think you can beat that, then leave a comment with your high score along with your full name, phone number, and the street you grew up on. Now, back to the video. Now, von Neumann wasn't alone in his interest in using computers for the purposes of prediction and control. In 1950, the same year he gave that lecture at Princeton, a man named William Goodell got on a plane and traveled to French-occupied Vietnam. Goodell was working for the US military's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, now called DARPA because they added defensive to the beginning. Woke strikes again. In Vietnam, Goodell saw France's defeat at the hands of indigenous guerrillas and realized that given America's habit of anti-communist interventionism, the US would soon find itself in a similar situation. He had no idea just how right he was. Now, this is the US military we're talking about here. Unlike those fucking French surrender frogs, these guys knew how to crack some skulls. They had already done plenty of counterinsurgency warfare in the Philippines and South America, not to mention the CIA's covert ops in North Vietnam and Laos. But Goodell had something different in mind. He believed that the key to success in these kinds of conflicts would be the use of cutting-edge technology. In '58, Goodell became head of ARPA's Office of Foreign Developments, where he oversaw their covert military operations overseas, particularly counterinsurgency during the Cold War. In 1961, he started ARPA's top-secret Combat Development and Test Center, which set up shop in Vietnam, Thailand, Lebanon, and Panama, where they developed weapons and strategies, trained anti-communist death squads, and took part in counterinsurgency raids and psyops, or as America would call that, Tuesday. But remember that Goodell was a tech nerd, and so in addition to all of that, he also set up Project Agile, a decade-long classified program supporting US counterinsurgency efforts in Southeast Asia and beyond. Agile aimed to combine social science research with cutting-edge technology in order to predict and control the rise of social movements in conflict zones. They developed computerized surveillance systems in the jungles of Vietnam and Thailand along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which they used to track insurgents, call in airstrikes, and drop napalm. But Agile also had another objective. They brought on social and behavioral scientists whose job it was to use these surveillance systems to study the left-wing insurgency groups that they were bombing the ever-loving fuck out of. Yeah, it says here that a common trait amongst communist guerrillas is that they really like having skin and become agitated when it's melted off with napalm. In 1964, this research led to Project Camelot, aka Methods for Predicting and Influencing Social Change and Internal War Potential. The goal was to develop a sort of radar system that could predict and prevent left-wing political movements so they could be shut down before they even started. Ironically, the thing that actually wound up getting shut down, though, was Project Camelot itself in 1965, after they invited Chilean academics to join it, who then threatened to expose the whole operation, accusing ARPA of building a coup machine that would inevitably be used to interfere with their own country's elections. Incidentally, 8 years later, the CIA backed Pinochet's coup against Salvador Allende using some of those same techniques that were developed by Project Camelot and Agile. Small world, eh? But at the same time as Goodell was disrupting and innovating covert ops, we also got the first ventures into making genuine neural networks, the first of which was the Mark I perceptron. Developed in 1958 by Frank Rosenblatt for the US Navy, the perceptron could be shown a piece of paper with a mark on it and determine if it was on the left or right side of the page, and could also tell a circle and a square apart, all with an accuracy of 99.8%. And I mean, not to brag, but I can pretty much do that too, but whatever. It was pretty impressive for the time, especially since physically the thing looked like it could have been a top post from our cable gore. The reason for this was because the perceptron was a product of a school of thought called connectionism. So basically, at the time, there were two competing philosophies of consciousness, symbolism and connectionism. Now, both of these theories are extremely complicated, and I'm not at all an expert, so bear in mind that I'm oversimplifying things a lot. But basically, connectionists believe that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon that just sort of happens when there are enough connections in a brain or brain-like device. Therefore, if you wanted to create artificial intelligence, all you needed to do was build a computer with enough connections, and there you go. Symbolists, on the other hand, thought of consciousness as coming from interactions with and the manipulation of symbols, meaning that it couldn't be achieved without a degree of embodiment in the physical world. While the present-day consensus is more or less that a combination of the two methods is best, at the time, this debate caused a massive schism which, along with the lack of any meaningful advancements in the field, eventually led to the first AI winter, a period of time from around 1974 to 1980 when AI research ground to a halt. But an interesting thing about connectionism is that it had a pretty unlikely early proponent, the Austrian economist and father of neoliberalism, Friedrich Hayek. Most famous for his work in economics, in his book, The Road to Serfdom, Hayek argued that all forms of state intervention into economics inevitably lead to totalitarianism, and instead claimed that markets organically emerged in their ideal state when left alone, a process he called spontaneous order. Notably, while Hayek thought that things like government regulations and welfare programs were literally 1984, he was a vocal supporter of far-right regimes such as Pinochet, Salazar, and apartheid South Africa. Funny how things work out like that, eh? Don't bother asking Perceptron to square that circle. But in his 1955 book, The Sensory Order, an inquiry into the foundations of theoretical psychology, an adaptation of a paper that he wrote in 1920, Hayek applied this theory to human consciousness, claiming that, like the market, the mind emerges from a series of connections made by individual neurons firing in accordance with the invisible hand of the cerebellum. While this theory obviously fits a little bit conveniently well with the view that society should be organized by the logics of the free market, what's a bit more interesting is how this all fits into a question at the core of the debate between connectionists and symbolists. This wasn't just an issue of what causes intelligence, but also of what causes intelligence to be known. For Hayek, this was an inherently unanswerable question. He argued that understanding and classification are inherently hierarchical, meaning that something can only be understood by something more complex than it, meaning that the mind can never understand itself because it's not more complex than itself. This, again, fits conveniently well with Hayek's economic theories in favor of a system that completely ignores human psychology in favor of the cold logic of the market. And I realize this is getting very abstract and theoretical, but what I think is really important here is how this fits not just with an Econ 101 theory of the world, but also with the unknowable black box that is artificial intelligence. One of the most interesting examples of this to me is Google Translate. For anyone who doesn't remember, prior to 2016, Google Translate was a joke. Most of its translations were about as accurate as an Asian language tattoo on a white person that reads shrimp fried rice. But then in 2016, things abruptly changed. All of a sudden, Google Translate actually worked. The reason was because while previously it had run on a sort of one-to-one literal translation model, now Google had changed it over to a neural network that placed words in a sort of digital map that connected their various contexts and meanings. For example, the word tank was placed near words like water or gasoline, but also armored, battle, or world of. But then things got weird. While it was being developed, the researchers realized that it was capable of doing what are called zero-shot translations. What that means is that if it was trained to translate, say, English to Korean and then English to German, to the researchers' complete surprise, they found that it could then also do Korean to German. This implies the existence of a secret fourth language created by the neural network that's completely inaccessible to us, that was created not because the neural network was told to do so, but as an emergent phenomenon. As Bridel points out, the problem with the sci-fi trope of AI being hardwired to follow certain laws is that it kind of assumes that artificial intelligence would be in some way intelligible to us, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I think this should be very concerning, not so much in a robot uprising kind of way, but in how neatly this fits with Hayek's theory of the mind. While we definitely shouldn't think of this as computers genuinely forming languages or thinking, this is an unknowable system, and the way that it's been dealt with is through the market, with no mind paid to its irrationalities. It's probably not a coincidence then that despite the utopian promises, the main thing that we've seen as AI has developed has been increasing centralization of power, mostly in the hands of the big platforms that already run the internet, and massive pushes towards deregulation and austerity as regular people are abandoned in the face of total surveillance and automation. I'm so tired right now, I haven't slept. It's my birthday. But on that cheery note, let's go back now to a simpler time, the first use of autonomous weapons in 1987. Named Aegis after the shield Athena gave to Perseus, it was designed to protect ships from aerial attacks by combining all sorts of information like radar and satellite imaging and then computing it and either giving the human operators options for how to respond, or it could just go fully autonomous. While it's still around to this day, Aegis was first deployed on the USS Vincennes, which during the Iran-Iraq War disobeyed orders by entering Iran's waters in pursuit of Iranian gunboats. Once there, rather than finding the gunboats, Aegis mistook a civilian passenger plane for an enemy jet and shot down Flight 655, killing the 290 passengers and crew members on board. This kind of tragedy shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, since, as I'll be talking about more soon, these kinds of autonomous weapon systems have a horrifyingly bad track record. That said, I think that it's a mistake to use that fact as an excuse not to take these systems seriously. For one thing, this is pretty much always a bad argument when it comes to AI, since they're always improving. But also, as Bridel argues, when things go wrong, we get an important view into the kind of logic behind these systems. A good example of this is one of the early pre-internet military computer networks, the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment, better known as SAGE. Developed in a partnership between MIT, IBM, and the US Air Force, SAGE was designed to coordinate all the radar systems that made up NORAD, and was used to watch for a Soviet nuclear strike during the Cold War. But SAGE's real legacy was the design of its consoles, which were objectively the coolest possible way of interacting with a computer. Oh, you sneeze. Each one had a built-in ashtray, and instead of a mouse, the operators would interact with the screen using a Duck Hunt-style light gun. Just add a mini fridge full of Monster Energy and it would be literal perfection. Naturally, this came with some downsides though, which was that SAGE was complete garbage. Some notable bugs include regularly mistaking birds for enemy fighter jets, training tapes being left running causing operators to think that an actual nuclear strike was happening, and the fact that incredibly small mistakes like flipping switches in the wrong order was all it took to launch surface-to-air nuclear missiles. Interestingly, while SAGE was better designed for causing a nuclear holocaust than preventing one, it turned out to be more than good enough for managing basically all commercial air travel. So, next time your flight is delayed, remember that light guns are finicky, but that's the price you have to pay for greatness. So in the 1950s, American Airlines was struggling to manage reservations on their flights and had started looking for a technical solution. In '53, by chance, American Airlines president C.R. Smith found himself on a flight sitting beside an IBM salesman named Blair Smith. The story goes that the two bonded over sharing the most common last name in America, and then one thing led to another, and the two Smiths found themselves having a high-level conversation about the computing architecture of their respective companies, ultimately realizing that SAGE would be a great fit for American Airlines' needs. And so, 35,000 feet in the air, SAGE was purchased, and the Semi-Automatic Business Research Environment, or SABRE, was born. SABRE became American Airlines' ticket reservation system and then was spun off into its own company, which currently handles about 74% of all passenger flights. Now, I bring all this up not just so that you'll have an interesting anecdote to bring up on your next riot date, thus wooing the love of your life. You're welcome, by the way. But also because I think that these kinds of stories of technological failures are really important for understanding what's going on in our world. The kinds of technology that run our world are so omnipresent that they become invisible. That is, until they break. This relates to a concept in critical geography called code space. Code spaces are physical spaces that are completely interwoven with technology, so much so that if the code breaks, the place stops existing. A perfect example of this is, appropriately, an airport. If SABRE or any of the other massively complicated systems that govern every part of air travel broke down, even for a couple of hours, basically every airport on Earth would all stop being airports and just become large buildings filled with angry people. But if we're going to try and analyze these malfunctions, then in the case of SAGE, given that the system was built at the height of the Cold War, I think that we can think of its many issues as expressions of that time period. What kind of computer mistakes flocks of birds for enemy jets and launches nuclear ICBMs if you breathe on it wrong? One that's paranoid. When it comes to more contemporary forms of machine automation, though, particularly in the field of face and image recognition, there's a different issue that seems to come up a lot. So, in 2009, a Taiwanese-American woman named Jaws Wang and her brother bought their mom a Nikon digital camera for Mother's Day, but whenever they tried to take a picture, they got an error message saying that someone had blinked. That same year, there was a viral video about how HP's newest face tracking webcam didn't work on black people.
White Wanda appears, the camera moves. Black Desi gets in there. Oh, nope. No face recognition anymore, buddy. I'm going on record and I'm saying it. Hewlett-Packard computers are racist.
Just last year, an investigation into Stable Diffusion found similar results when a prompt for, quote, an African man in his fancy house returned this result. Or when they prompted it to make black African doctors helping poor and sick white children photojournalism, they got back... And while these cases may not be the biggest deal in the world, I think that the fact that these kinds of racial bugs are so persistent is worth being worried about, considering that this technology is being used by police and militaries all around the world. In 2020, a group called Algorithm Watch did an investigation into Google's Vision Cloud and found that it, quote, labeled an image of a dark-skinned individual holding a thermometer gun, whilst a similar image with a light-skinned individual was labeled electronic device. This is a pretty big deal since Google currently has multiple deals in the works to license this technology for military uses. All of this is an extension of the garbage in, garbage out principle. The idea that while AIs and neural networks will continue to become more and more powerful, if they aren't being trained on the right thing, then they'll continue to fuck up. Probably the most famous example of this is a story where the army apparently tried to train an AI to recognize camouflage tanks. They got a bunch of camo tanks, hid them in a forest, took pictures of them, and then removed the tanks and took pictures of the same forest without them, and then used those pictures to train the AI. But when they tested it, they found that it was completely useless. The problem was that they had taken the pictures of the tanks in the morning and the ones without them in the afternoon. And so they hadn't actually trained the AI on how to identify a tank, but instead on how to tell what time it was. Now, just to be clear, that story is very famous, but also very almost certainly didn't happen. For a real-world example, though, we can turn to one of the most insane cases I've ever heard of. So, in 2016, a pair of researchers from Shanghai Jiao Tong University named Xiaolin Wu and Zhi Zhang published a paper called Automated Inference on Criminality Using Face Images, which is basically what it sounds like. They fed a neural network pictures of random people as well as the mugshots of criminals to see if it could learn to identify criminality based on skull shape. This obviously sparked a ton of controversy, which Wu and Zhang responded to with a follow-up paper that really doubles down. In their follow-up piece, they deny all accusations of racism or phrenology, which already not a great look. But when I say they doubled down, Wu and Zhang actually argued that not only was their program not racist, but they claimed that it could actually be used as a tool to fight against racism, saying,
unlike a human examiner or judge, a computer vision algorithm or classifier has absolutely no subjective baggages, having no emotions, no biases whatsoever due to past experience, race, religion, political doctrine, gender, age, etc. No mental fatigue, no preconditioning of a bad sleep or meal. The automated inference on criminality eliminates the variable of meta-accuracy, or the competence of the human judge/examiner, altogether.
This is the best example of garbage in, garbage out that I've ever seen. Because, sure, I will concede that maybe an algorithm could be less biased than a human when faced with the task of deciding if someone is guilty or not based purely on their facial structure. But, that kind of misses the whole issue, which is that, you know, deciding if someone committed a crime based off of their appearance instead of, say, evidence is itself bad. But they just don't interrogate that at all. Now, let's get back to the history. So far, we've covered a lot of the background, but things didn't really heat up until around the 2010s. There were 3 causes for this. First up was the big 9/11 and its follow-up, the Iraq War. So basically, W had his heart set on killing 1 million Iraqis, and he wasn't about to let something small, like the fact that they had nothing to do with the attack, get in his way. But this required them to get a little bit creative with the laws of war. And so in 2002, the Authorization of Use of Military Force, or AUMF, was passed, declaring that the US had the right to attack a nation preemptively as long as it was deemed to be a threat to America's national security or other interests. Bush justified this, saying that,
"If we wait for threats to fully materialize, we will have waited too long."
And just like that, the Cold War era policy of deterrence and containment was replaced with one of preemptive strikes, which came to be known as the Bush Doctrine. But in the paper, Algorithmic Predictions in Preemptive Violence, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Unmanned Aerial Systems, Anthony Downey argues that the move to preemptive attacks relies on the same methods that AI models use to statistically predict potential outcomes. Given that, it's not so surprising that the Iraq War and the global war on terror required massive advancements in autonomous weapons in order to be carried out. Unlike a conventional conflict like, say, the Gulf War, the preemptive justification of the Iraq War and the decentralized nature of counterterrorism required advancements in weapons and surveillance in order to spot threats before they happened. And while this might seem like ancient history, the AUMF was intentionally written without an expiration date and has been used by every administration since it was passed to conduct military operations with zero accountability or oversight. To give you an idea of how massive this is, a 2021 study found that it had been used to justify at least 139 attacks across 85 countries, and this was all just between 2018 and 2020. The first Trump administration even unsuccessfully tried to use the AUMF to justify the 2020 assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani. And while I'm no fan of assassinations, at least not when they're done by the US military, it is very funny that of all the things the AUMF has been used for, this was the one that crossed the line. Like, listen here, Mr. Drumpf. The AUMF is part of a proud and noble military tradition. Drone strikes, extraordinary rendition, Abu Ghraib, and you, sir, have disgraced all of them. Now, we'll come back to all of this stuff soon, but before we do, there's another important part of our story. So in 2008, following the subprime mortgage collapse, the US economy was at its lowest point since the Great Depression. To stimulate growth, the Fed introduced its zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP, which, you guessed it, slashed interest rates. The thinking was that since what got us into this mess was the ultra-rich gambling on risky investments, the only logical way out was going to be getting the ultra-rich to gamble on risky investments even harder. And so, through a combination of non-existent interest rates as well as some quantitative easing, America's wealth criminals were given what was essentially free money and then told to go back to the casino and don't come home until the economy's working again. The big thing to understand here is that high interest is great for risk-averse investors who can just park their money in government bonds and watch the interest pile up. ZIRP ended this. This came with the nasty side effect of punishing the middle class for saving, while those with enough wealth to have a timeshare at Bohemian Grove were forced to actually do something with their fortunes besides hoarding them and buying jewel-encrusted animal masks. And so, they started to move from safe investments into the much riskier but potentially more profitable business of funding startups through venture capital, bringing them to Silicon Valley. Venture capital is a real all-or-nothing game. Even at the best of times, investors are looking for massive hits that will go on to dominate their given fields. Monopoly is the name of the game, and as I talked about in my Dead Internet video, the emerging world of tech platforms fit this to a T. As Nick Cernick lays out in his book Platform Capitalism, the defining characteristic of a platform is that it benefits from the network effect, meaning that the appeal comes from how many other people are also using it. These platforms that were all coming up around this time were pretty much by definition only successful if they became monopolies, making them the ideal high-risk investment for venture capitalists with money to burn, giving us Web 2.0. But the architects of the War on Terror and the startup founders had another mutual interest other than their shared hatred of humanity: mass surveillance. Starting with the Patriot Act, throughout the aughts, the US government began spying on its own citizens like crazy, with programs like DARPA's Total Information Awareness, PRISM, and the NSA's self-explanatory Collect It All strategy. The problem, though, with collecting it all is that while it turns out that listening in on the phone calls, emails, and text messages of every American is relatively easy and fun, but doing anything with that data, though, is incredibly difficult. Luckily, they were able to get some help with that by hiring the newly emerging tech platforms who were dealing with this very same issue. The three-letter agencies put up the funds for R&D, and the tech platforms built them ways of analyzing massive data sets, which the government then open-sourced, allowing the tech companies to use these programs for their own purposes. And then finally, in 2011, Alex Krzyzewski, Ilya Sutskever, and Jeffrey Hilton published the AlexNet paper, which showed that neural networks are in fact doable, provided that the people making them have tremendous amounts of data at their disposal. This fully revived AI research, and from there, all the pieces were finally in place. Now, what I've been describing here is what Andrew Merrill calls startup war. As the name suggests, this is the bringing together of the US military and big tech platforms, so that now Wayfair is working with ICE to furnish immigrant detention centers. That's actually completely true, by the way. I guess the theory that Wayfair was trafficking kids turned out to have some truth to it after all. Life imitates art. So the key characteristic of startup war is that now, rather than the military making tech themselves, they instead take on more of an investor role. Think Shark Tank, but if Kevin O'Leary killed a lot more people. And I'm not even really joking there. Kevin O'Leary and his wife killed 2 people in a boating accident. But also, yeah, that's real. Almost every branch of the US military has by now shifted money away from R&D to instead open straight-up venture capital firms. One of the first of these, and the one that most of the others are to some extent modeled after, is In-Q-Tel, the non-profit venture capital firm run by our friends over at the CIA. Started in 1999 by the DCI at the time, George Tenet. In his memoir, At the Center of the Storm, Tenet describes his creation as
a hybrid organization. In-Q-Tel blends research and development models from corporate venture capital funds, businesses, nonprofits, and government. While we pay the bills, In-Q-Tel is independent of CIA. CIA identifies pressing problems, and In-Q-Tel provides the technology to address them. The In-Q-Tel Alliance has put the agency back at the leading edge of technology, a frontier we never should have retreated from in the first place. This highly unusual collaboration between government and the private sector enabled CIA to take advantage of the technology that Las Vegas uses to identify corrupt card players, and apply it to link analysis for terrorists, and to adapt the technology that online booksellers use and convert it to scour millions of pages of documents looking for unexpected results.
Dude's such a shitty writer. This is real. When I gave that quote to Flesh Simulator, he fully thought that I had given him ad copy and not a quote written by the former head of the CIA. But one of the funniest parts of this, though, is how, while tech CEOs love to act like total badasses for letting the army use their cloud services or whatever, the opposite happens too. So many of these military VC firms are branded like tech startups. One example of this is DARPA's Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, or DIUX, which was originally set up to be a sort of matchmaker between private tech companies and the DoD, but less than a year in, its already very startup-y name was made even worse when the org was rebranded as DIUX 2.0, becoming yet another straight-up venture capital fund, specifically for non-traditional defense contractors. Not sure what the twist was on the 2.0 version. I'm guessing something like the girl has to message first. Or there's the Trusted Capital Marketplace, which basically seems to do what DIUX was originally designed for, but with a name that sounds even more like an app where gig workers sell their plasma. And like, I'm not trying to backseat espionage here, but come on, man. Say what you will about Project Camelot, but that at least sounds cool as hell. DIUX 2.0 sounds like a fractional NFT marketplace founded by a few guys who did too much kratom at a hackathon. Another change that's come from Startup War has been that, as Merrill argues, previously, thanks to the war on terror, military conflict had become far more about regional skirmishes, decentralized conflicts, diffused power, and lots of proxy wars. Startup War is, in contrast, a return to the politics of great powers, now framed in the very startup-y logic of competition between firms, or in this case, countries. For example, there's the now beaten-to-death justification for AI weapons, where America needs to develop autonomous killbots in order to out-innovate Russia and China. But while those changes are both very cringe, to see the real sinister effect that tech startups have had on the military, let's take a look at how they've come to increasingly rely on algorithms to pick their targets. This is known as a signature strike, a kind of drone strike where the identity of the target isn't known. This is in contrast to what's now called a personality strike, where the target is a person or military installation that's actually confirmed to have done something, which, used to just be called a strike. The way these strikes work is that massive amounts of surveillance data are fed into an algorithm, which then tries to calculate the probability that a person is a valid target. This can be based on factors like maybe someone's phone was in the area when a bomb went off, their childhood friend joined a militant group, or they just liked a few particularly spicy posts on social media. Whatever the case, when someone's probability passes a certain threshold, they're recommended as a target. These kinds of signature strikes make up the majority of people killed by drones. This is what the former head of the NSA, Michael Hayden, meant when in 2014 he said, "We kill people based on metadata." And the thing is, if any of this sounds familiar, that's because tech platforms like Meta and Google use this exact same targeting technique when they show you an ad. But now, let's finally get into the biggest star to come out of Startup Wars, Palantir. The company was started by Peter Thiel based on the work he was doing back in the PayPal days. In the year 2K, PayPal had blown up, going from 12,000 users to 2.7 million over the course of about 8 months. Thiel was managing their fraud department, where he developed a decentralized security system that turned out to be incredibly effective. 2 years later, PayPal was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, and so with that walking around money burning a hole in his pocket and nothing but time and Gawker.com to kill, Thiel decided to call up his college roommate Alex Karp, and together they turned the concept for PayPal's security system into a very different kind of tech company. Palantir was founded in 2002 and began offering their analytics-based software engineering project to government agencies looking to securely share, sort, and interpret sensitive information. A year later, they got a bite when In-Q-Tel made a 2-round investment. From then until 2008, the CIA was their only customer. This relationship allowed Thiel, Karp, and Palantir's president Stephen Cohen to turn their scrappy little CIA-funded startup into a full-fledged defense company. Over the years, these three guys have made sure to consolidate their power, forming what shareholders and SEC investigators have playfully called an oligarchy of three, in which the three founders have organized their stocks in such a way that they will always have a minimum combined voting share of 49.9999999%, no matter how much stock they have. very normal company stuff. Anyway, over the next couple years, Palantir started to branch out a bit, signing contracts with the DoD, the FBI, ICE, and just so many police departments all over America. Like, at minimum, all the ones on screen right now, but the full list isn't known by anyone outside of Palantir's C-suite. While all public records now say that all of their police contracts have expired without being renewed, they have set up secret deals with cities in the past, so maybe take that one with a grain of salt. But Palantir's work isn't just limited to law enforcement and the military. For example, in 2010, the NYPD put them in touch with the folks over at JP Morgan, and 5 years later, they were valued at $20 billion. But another big area that they're making headway in is healthcare. Palantir's Tiberius software was a big part of the American vaccine distribution program Operation Warp Speed, which understandably raised concerns given that this gave Palantir access to an absurd amount of extremely private data. In a 2020 statement made to the SEC, Palantir has said that their goal is to, quote, become the default operating system for data across the US government. A dream that seems to be coming true thanks to Doge regularly tapping Palantir to take over sections of the government that they slashed. A choice which I'm sure is based purely on merit and not the fact that Doge hired a bunch of former Palantir employees or that Thiel and Musk started PayPal together. They've also gone to all sorts of other industries all over the world, usually in resource extraction or media, as in the case of Latin America's largest media company, Grupo Globo, not to mention how they're now partnering with the NHS in the UK, as well as developing AI weapon systems for Ukraine and Israel. Given all of that, I think that a better way of understanding Palantir's objective is, as Andrew Iliadis and Amelia Acker put it in their paper, The Seer and the Scene, surveying Palantir's surveillance platform, quote, Palantir aspires to be a Google for organizations that value secrecy. So there you have it. Next time you hear someone worried about Palantir's mass surveillance and weapons empire, just tell them that there's nothing to worry about. They're just a more morally gray version of Google. No, but yeah, this probably won't come as too much of a surprise, but these guys are massive pieces of shit. Albeit not so much in an Illuminati way, so much as just being extremely sketchy. There is, of course, all the obligatory racism in their hiring decisions and a lack of girl bosses in leadership roles, typical of any tech company, but it goes a lot further than just that. Remember that JP Morgan contract? Well, from 2009 to 2013, a senior manager there allegedly used Palantir's tech to spy on employees. Meanwhile, in 2011, it was revealed that they'd allegedly been engaged in a secret campaign to discredit WikiLeaks and a number of journalists through hacking and the spread of disinformation. Alex Karp issued a public apology for that, which wound up being undercut when, in 2024, it turned out that they had also, allegedly, paid influencers to smear the Good Law Project, a UK non-profit that's advocated against them partnering with the NHS. And, of course, they were also involved in the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2018, scraping Facebook user data for political profiling. I assume that all of this is what Alex Karp is referring to when he regularly says that Palantir unapologetically supports anti-woke Western values.
I think the central risk to Palantir and America and the world is a regressive way of thinking that is corrupting and corroding our institutions that calls itself progressive. I am in a different way a fighter for Western values.
Well, you've been taught in college that you basically should have no beliefs, that the West is inferior.
That focus on civil liberties is making us really rich, which drives the woke, pagan, religious practicing, Neanderthal thinking.
And is called woke, but is actually a form of a thin pagan religion.
It leads to self-flagellation and losing on the battlefield, losing intellectually, losing your party, losing your country. The kind of pro-West thing that I'm very proud of.
And make no mistake, Palantir isn't just in this for the money. They are explicitly ideologically motivated. Peter Thiel is, of course, a massive Trump guy who publicly donated $1.25 million to his 2016 campaign right after the Access Hollywood tapes leaked. And they've claimed many, many times that any US tech companies that don't work with the military are unpatriotic. This was actually the subject of Alex Karp's book, The Technological Republic, and a New York Times opinion piece he wrote where he compared the use of AI weapons with the decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan, which sounds shockingly reasonable until you realize that he's saying that nuking Japan was an uncomplicatedly good thing to do. It's actually wild. I was reading his book, and a lot of it is just him talking about the same things I've covered in this video, except he thinks that they're all good. Like, literally, he just tells all these cheery anecdotes about companies who are honored to work with the US military, but then he'll just leave out the fact that what he's describing is like the invention of Agent Orange. Now, at this point, the introduction to the video is probably long enough, so I should get into what it is that Palantir actually does. And I'm sorry to say, but it's gonna be pretty anticlimactic. While Anduril, the other big AI weapons company that also happens to be named after a Lord of the Rings reference, this time Aragorn's sword, actually makes the kind of sci-fi stuff that you're probably picturing when you think of AI weapons, Palantir, on the other hand, focuses on the back end. Basically, when it comes to complex implementations of AI, having a trained model is the easy part. Where it gets tricky is all the background infrastructure that goes into storing, analyzing, implementing, managing, integrating, and communicating the features into other technology and parts of the network. That back-end infrastructure is what Palantir does. More specifically, they specialize in providing end users with smooth, intuitive UI and genuinely excellent data visualization. Basically, their special sauce is that they're really, really good at presenting complex data analytics in a way that's simple enough that a trained horse could understand it. Very important considering that a large chunk of their users are cops and ICE agents. The two main products Palantir offers are Gotham, an operating system designed for police and military operations, and Foundry, which is similar but used by businesses instead. Both are cloud-based SaaSes powered by Apollo, Palantir's back-end data delivery system. While this may sound simple, the applications are limited only by the depths of human cruelty. For example, in 2018, Palantir received a $160 million contract to help ICE build profiles on undocumented immigrants and their families, which were used for prosecutions, arrests, and deportations. This was interesting because while they're obviously pretty brazen about the kind of work that they do,
our product is used on occasion to kill people.
In the military context, AI that's deadly scares the bejeebers, or trying to use less foul words, out of our enemies.
But in this case, they did something pretty uncharacteristic by claiming that while they were working with ICE, it was only, quote, with the Homeland Security Investigations Unit of ICE, not enforcement and removal operations. This was a complete lie, though, as documents obtained by a FOIA request proved. Regardless, in 2019, the nature of this relationship became extremely clear when Palantir built ICE software that made profiles of illegal immigrants and their families, resulting in 443 deportations. But hey, they aren't all bad, though. In 2012, they actually began a charitable endeavor where they gave the New Orleans Police Department free access to their predictive policing prototype, which, those are three words that should probably send a chill down your spine, eh? The NOPD was given access to Gotham, which was used to map people's social networks, assign them risk scores, and then generate target lists, all without the public's knowledge or consent. The program was shut down in 2018 after it was revealed by a massive investigation by The Verge. A year later, a similar arrangement with the LAPD also came to light and was similarly ended amidst public outcry over how, it was shown to disproportionately target minorities while also not actually reducing crime at all. Think Minority Report, emphasis on minority. But why was it free? That's odd, right? Like, Thiel and Karp may be MAGA, but were they really just algorithmically harassing minorities for the sheer love of the game? Well, it turns out no. In the case of New Orleans, the deal was set up by the famous Democratic Party strategist and massive piece of shit James Carville, and is a great example of the circular way that all of this works. Palantir gave the cops this prototype for free, which works out amazingly for the police department, not because they can't afford it, but because there's all sorts of pesky oversight on what police departments spend their money on. Not so when it comes to gifts, though. Carville actually bragged regarding the deal, saying that, quote, "No one in New Orleans knows about this." But what does Palantir get out of this, you ask? What's in it for Daddy Teal? Huh? I don't know why I did that. Well, whenever Palantir gets a new client, they get access to that client's data. This allows them to make more products, which gets them more grants, more clients, and access to even more data. And at the end of the day, that's the most important part for them. Being able to train the AI in real-world environments, since, as we know, AI weapons need conflict. Now, we'll get back to technological horrors beyond our comprehension soon, but first, I want to zoom out a bit. So, this guy with poor public speaking skills.
When I was in utero, my mum and dad had met, when they were both working in Manchester.
Is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet. The talk he's giving here is called How the World Wide Web Just Happened, and in it, he describes all the ways that he just so happened to be in the right place at the right time to completely change the world. His parents were both extremely accomplished computer scientists, and since the transistor was invented the year he was born, by the time he was a kid, he was able to buy them from the neighborhood electronics store, allowing him to make all sorts of electronic devices. While he was studying physics in university, integrated circuits became available, and so he started making visual displays out of broken TVs he bought from a repair store. After graduating, he joined CERN, where he invented hyperlinks, and since there was a need for researchers to share information, he connected that to the Transmission Control Protocol and domain name systems, creating the World Wide Web in 1989. Now, this is just one way of telling the story of the internet, and to be fair, it's a good one. It feels like something from a Malcolm Gladwell book, where a million separate factors all came together just so. If not for the wartime production of transistors, leading to them becoming affordable enough to wind up in the hands of this nerdy kid, if his parents weren't accomplished computer scientists who introduced him to technology from a young age and encouraged his tinkering, if he hadn't wound up at a cutting-edge research facility and then used the skills he developed to come up with a common-sense solution to a problem, the internet wouldn't have been created. The Veritasium video writes itself. But there's another way of telling the story. In The Creative Act, Rick Rubin's book that everyone who's working on a manuscript publicly displays to prove that they're an artist, he writes that
if you have an idea you're excited about and you don't bring it to life, it's not uncommon for the idea to find its voice through another maker. This isn't because the other artist stole your idea, but because the idea's time has come.
And in New Dark Age, Bridel argues that this is kind of what happened with the internet. While Tim Berners-Lee may have been the one to actually make the web, all over the world at this same time, technology was converging onto this idea of connected computers. And so, not to take anything away from Tim here, I mean, just look at how excited he gets explaining how he used to play with punch card tape when he was a kid.
So that house was full of how exciting it was. Also full of 5-hole paper tape. 5-hole paper tape is good for lots of things. It's good for feeding information into a computer, like in some of the old sci-fi movies. And it's also really good for throwing across the room. It's good, if I had to have part of it here, I would throw it from the stage, which is what we used to do in our the pantomimes we put on the dining room table.
How can you not love this guy? But regardless, the need for network computers wasn't unique to CERN. At the time, researchers from all over the world were all converging on the same problem, and so if any part of Tim's story had been different, such that he didn't wind up with the right skills at the right place and the right time, I'm sure that someone else would have. And I think that something similar has happened in AI recently. Just like how the web was a necessary solution to the problem of needing network computers, AI had emerged as a solution to the problem of big data. You know how every app or website is now turning their search bar into a chatbot that no one wants or asked for? Well, the 2010s equivalent was companies, tech or otherwise, implementing incredibly sketchy privacy policies so they could claim that they're using big data for something. While companies like Google and Meta definitely did use massive amounts of data to make obscene fortunes, it turns out that if your business isn't one of the 5 websites most people spend 90% of their time on, then there's a good chance that big data analysis is completely useless for anything other than lying to shareholders on an earnings call. My favorite example of this is Under Armour, whose founder, Kevin Plank, ran the company into the ground by becoming obsessed with acquiring fitness apps as part of his connected fitness strategy, which was supposed to collect massive amounts of user data, which was somehow supposed to help them with the impossible task of designing a shoe that didn't look like shit. But even companies that actually did things with data were still having a tough time. Twitter has always struggled to keep the lights on, even before Elon Musk straddled it with $13 billion of debt and scared away advertisers by turning it into the Nazi spam bot site. Until last year, Reddit had straight up never made a profit, no matter how much gold was doled out for winning the internet. And same goes for most streaming services. And so, just like how by the late 80s, the necessity of network computers meant that the internet's time had come, I think that the recent rapid development and adoption of AI can likewise be understood as having come out of the need for tech platforms to develop some way of turning their massive troves of user data into something that can make money. And now, every site from Reddit to Stack Overflow to fucking Quora are making AI chatbots or else just licensing out their data to other sites, all pretty much just to improve viewer retention and advertising conversion rates. But worst of all, even that's still a bit too optimistic. Like with big data, for most sites, the pivot to AI won't be enough to keep them in the black for long, since the actual winners will be the platforms that already dominated the internet and so have the most data and infrastructure. As the president of Signal, Meredith Whittaker, said in an interview with Wired,
"What was new to ignite this AI boom in 2012? It was the presence of massive amounts of data, training data and input data, and powerful computational chips. The more of them strung together, the better. Now, what are those? Those are exactly the affordances that have accrued to the early platform companies that have built out their social media networks, built out their data centers. With artificial intelligence, we're basically relaundering a lot of this shit through broken models that are giving Google more and more authority to claim intelligence when what they're actually doing is issuing derivatives of the shitty data they have. And what was AI used for? Why were they into it? Because it's really good at tuning ad algorithms, at targeting ads. It's not an accident that the 3 authors of this AlexNet paper were immediately hired by Google.
But as I said, this is getting harder and harder. The entire internet has been scraped, and as a result, AI is hitting a bottleneck, with each new model demonstrating less of an improvement from its predecessor. In fact, since there's now so much AI slop online, the new challenge they have is preventing their models from being trained on too much artificial content, or they could get what's called model collapse, resulting in them actually getting worse. Regardless of how they get around this, though, the situation is that these tech platforms are in a race to turn everything and eventually everyone into training data. And the thing is that even though finding more information has hit a roadblock, when it comes to turning people into data, things have only sped up. Since when it comes to training AI weapons, these models don't need to be fed content, but blood. And so, for the companies building these things, well, if you've paid any attention to the news in the last few years, you'll know that business is booming. Given this fact, it shouldn't be a surprise that the place where we can see everything I've been talking about laid out most plainly is a country that's been at war for the majority of its existence. So now, let's talk about Israel. Something that really can't be overstated is how important weapons are to the Israeli economy. In the 1950s, Zionist settlers, after having pushed out Palestinians and the British in the 1948 Palestine War, were faced with international embargoes in hostile neighboring states, and so got to work developing their own nationalized weapons industry. But the real turning point was the Six-Day War, which ended with Israel taking over the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Following the war, France, one of Israel's top arms suppliers, cut them off with an embargo, prompting Israel to A. cozy up to America, who was in the market for a non-Soviet curious ally in the area, and B. invest way more heavily in their arms industry, building up state-owned companies like Rafael and the creatively named Israeli Aircraft Industries and Israeli Military Industries. But as these companies grew, in order to pay for weapons development, they needed to fund them with more than they were getting from the government, and so Israel began exporting their weapons. With each new conflict, Israel's weapons got more advanced, and by 1973, following the Yom Kippur War, they were open for business for anyone in need of some Merkava tanks and a couple thousand Uzis. As Haim Bershith Zabner wrote in An Army Like No Other, quote, "The economy abandoned oranges for hand grenades." When it comes to Israel's customer base, a good rule of thumb is that if there's a regime that's committing horrifying human rights abuses, chances are Israel armed them. These include, but are by no means limited to, Myanmar, Rhodesia, Indonesia, the UAE, Sri Lanka, apartheid South Africa, Chile under Pinochet, and of course, Argentina's military dictatorship during the Dirty War, a junta that killed or disappeared somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people, around 3,000 of which were Jews. Then, in the 80s, Israel began hitting the neoliberalism juice real hard and started the process of privatizing more than 90% of state-owned businesses. This hit the arms industry in the 90s, when during the Gulf War, Israel found themselves on the receiving end of 42 Iraqi Scud missiles, and were urged not to retaliate by Bush Sr., ultimately leading to Israel selling off ownership of their largest arm manufacturers in the hopes that this would lead to them becoming self-reliant enough to be able to start World War III without Daddy America's permission. And they're still trying to make that happen today. Now, at this point you may be wondering though if this self-reliance is in the room with us right now. Given the fact that to this day, the tiny country of Israel remains the 15th largest weapons importer in the world and the single largest recipient of US aid. Well, adopting neoliberal economic policies did manage to both raise the GDP and drive their poverty rate up to over 20%, actually 39% for the Arab Israelis and 35% for the ultra-Orthodox Haredi. So in other words, it was a complete success on all fronts. However, everyone knows that no self-respecting neoliberal economy would be caught dead without a complex international supply chain. And so, despite Israel currently being the world's 8th largest weapons exporter, their specialty is tech. And so they pretty much just sell drones, air defense systems like David's Sling, and a handful of rifles and machine guns, while importing basically all of their heavy munitions, ships, and aircraft. A key point here too is that just like how Israel turned lemons into hand grenades when the weapons embargoes placed on them throughout the 20th century forced them to invest in an arms industry of their own, the fact that they've been in nearly constant war with their neighbors has also been a blessing in that it's provided them with endless opportunities to test their weapons. This was laid out pretty well in an article in the Wall Street Journal from 1981, back when Israel was acting as a proxy for the US in the Cold War. The article states that, quote, Israelis complain that in criticizing Israel's hawkish policies, the US overlooks the fact that Israel has served as a kind of combat laboratory for US weapons development. This is an explicit aspect of Israel's arm industry. A key selling point for all of their products is that they can proudly say that they were battle tested. In fact, this was outright stated by Avi Hassan, the CEO of an Israeli tech incubator, who said that, quote, in general, the war in Gaza presents threats, but also opportunities to test emerging technologies in the field. And crucially, this works in reverse too. In the same way that Palantir has been more than happy to work with police departments free of charge purely for all the data that they'll collect. One of the reasons why countries love selling arms to Israel is so that they'll test them out. Say what you will about the US providing Israel with 2,000-pound bombs. Absolutely no one is arguing that those don't work. I'm sorry, but do you not believe that Israel has a right to defend its position as the world's leading war laboratory? But enough about their imports. Like I said, Israel specializes in high-tech weapons, so let's take a look at what they've been cooking up lately. To start with, as we know from our old friends von Neumann and the good people over at DARPA, if you're in the dirty business of predicting and controlling a population, then you're going to need lots and lots of surveillance. For Israel, this is most apparent in the West Bank, particularly the city of Hebron, most particularly H2, the section of the city occupied by both Palestinians and Israeli settlers, in which the IDF has placed around 2 cameras for every 5 meters, some of which are even installed inside of people's homes. On top of that, there's also plenty of sensors, drones, and spy balloons, making it probably the most exciting tech hub in the world for those in the business of creating nightmarish dystopias. All of this relates to a program by the Israeli military called Wolfpack, a massive database that contains the profiles on almost every Palestinian in the West Bank, including information like their names, faces, family members, education, and security ratings. There are some conflicting reports on when exactly Wolfpack was rolled out, but we're probably looking at around the late 2010s or maybe 2020. The way it worked was that at security checkpoints, which Palestinians are required to go through to enter or leave Israel, West Jerusalem, or other cities or villages in the West Bank, something that they often have to do as part of their daily commutes to see a doctor or visit family. At these checkpoints, Israeli soldiers can access this super cool high-tech database by making a literal phone call to the only place that has access to the database, which they call the War Room, but was literally just a government call center. Honestly, let them have their cool name, I say. Imagine joining the IDF all excited to kill toddlers, but you get stuck answering phones all day. As you can guess, the inconvenience is part of the point, but don't worry, all of that's in the past. Now, things have gotten much more high-tech and, not any better. In 2021, the IDF rolled out Blue Wolf, which, rather than requiring them to make a call on a literal telephone like a fucking tuberculosis-riddled rat catcher from the 1890s, instead, Blue Wolf is an app. The obvious upside is that now soldiers have to come up with another excuse when they want to arbitrarily detain someone at a checkpoint. The downside is that now these kinds of checks are done anywhere at any time. This has led to Blue Wolf receiving the nickname Facebook for Palestinians, which it's pretty fitting that the Palestinian version of anything is imposed on them by the Israeli government. Soldiers have told Amnesty International that the IDF actually gamified this by holding contests with prizes for soldiers that add the most Palestinians to the database, which I guess you could call Farmville for Palestinians. Using the app, soldiers can identify anyone in the database by scanning a person's ID, documents, or just by taking a picture of their face. Regarding that last one, I should say that the IDF has refused to confirm the use of facial recognition technology, although that's very obviously something that they're doing, given how many Palestinians have given testimony that this in fact does happen, not to mention this leaked IDF training video that very clearly states in this slide, a person can be identified by 3 methods: typing ID, facial recognition, or photographing ID. This gets even sillier though when you look at the newest addition to the Wolf family, Red Wolf, which is just straight up autonomous facial recognition cameras now deployed at checkpoints. Also, Red Wolf, Blue Wolf, look at this logo. Clearly, the people that we're dealing with here are the world's most evil furries, and I've been on the internet long enough to know that there's a lot of competition for that title. And so, looking at all this, something that's worth asking here is, why? As Anthony Lowenstein notes in his book, The Palestine Laboratory, no specific military justification has been given to explain this degree of surveillance. Instead, it seems to simply be in the general interest of prediction and control. But now, let's switch our focus to the work being done by Israel's private tech sector in order to turn the West Bank into a surveillance state. While the links between America's startup tech industry and its military aren't subtle, in Israel, they're front and center. In 2009, the Israeli Council of Foreign Affairs published a book called Startup Nation: The Story of Israel's Economic Miracle. The book was written by a former advisor for the U.S.'s occupation of Iraq, Dan Senner, and his brother-in-law, Saul Singer, the former editor of the Jerusalem Post. In it, the two argue that the reason for Israel's booming tech industry is the country's compulsory military service and the level of discipline and patriotism that instills. Interestingly, though, just like in Alex Karp's book, Senner and Singer are oddly vague about what exactly these tech startups actually use this discipline and patriotism to make. So let's get into that. One such startup is AnyVision, a surveillance and security company specializing in facial recognition and the winner of Israel's top defense prize in 2018. While they've been hired all over the world, providing security both for governments and private companies, most of their work has, of course, been in the West Bank. In 2019, NBC ran an article that was critical of the mass surveillance of Palestinians, and when they reached out to AnyVision for an interview, the company's CEO, Alan Echstein, responded by claiming that AnyVision was, quote, the most ethical company known to man, claimed that NBC was being paid off by Palestinians and then threatened to sue them. A couple days later, Echstein apparently calmed down a bit and sent a follow-up response. Quote, as a private company, we are not in a position to speak on behalf of any country, company, or institution. And then, a few days after that, changed his statement again to simply saying that, quote, we are affirmatively denying that AnyVision is involved in any other project beyond what we have already stated. Now, fun fact, AnyVision is extremely well connected, and so it's very likely that the person who wrote those follow-up statements was none other than Jen Psaki, who used to be head of AnyVision's crisis communication department before putting the skills she developed there to good use as Biden's press secretary. Then there's CoreSight AI, yet another key player in the field of facial recognition AI based out of Tel Aviv. While CoreSight loves to emphasize their commitment to protecting people's privacy, that's a little bit doubtful considering their work in the West Bank, although, to be fair, it's entirely possible that they just don't consider Palestinians people. In 2022, they allegedly partnered with Zosmont Limited, a company run by a former Israeli army colonel named Danny Tirza, one of the key architects of the wall that was built to separate the illegal settlements from the rest of the West Bank, which is also coincidentally where Tirza lives. Zosmont has allegedly used CoreSight's AI to develop a new kind of body cam for cops that can supposedly ID the faces of anyone in a crowd even if they're wearing a mask. By the way, I say allegedly here because CoreSight has refused to confirm or deny the claims that they're working with Zosmont, but that already incredibly suspicious statement becomes even less believable when you consider that the stuff that they're working on and what they claim that their technology can do lines up almost perfectly with Zosmont's body cam. And then there's Smart Shooter, who are doing more or less what it sounds like, developing weapon systems that can be used to augment guns to autonomously identify targets, assist in aiming, and even tell the shooter when to pull the trigger. While Smart Shooter will always emphasize that their systems can never actually pull the trigger themselves, that's getting less and less true thanks to their most controversial offering, the remote-controlled crowd dispersal system. Essentially, remote-controlled turrets placed around checkpoints in the West Bank designed to fire non-lethal rounds, for now, at protesters. But to see what a more deadly version of this might look like, we need only look away from the evil tech pool playground that is the West Bank, and instead turn our attentions to Gaza, where the IDF has been deploying various forms of AI weapons for years. While these have been used for the past 2 years to conduct the ongoing genocide there, they were first introduced during Operation Guardians of the Wall, an 11-day-long conflict in 2021, which the IDF has described as the first ever AI war, and they weren't lying. So, let me introduce you to some of the key players involved in this. First up is Fire Factory, an algorithm designed to handle logistics like ammunition allocation, timeline, and the prioritization of targets. Meanwhile, this works with a separate system called Alchemist, which gives unit commanders real-time updates on the battlefield. Things get significantly darker, though, when it comes to targeting. Like logistics, this is broken down into a number of separate parts, each with their own algorithm. Let's start with Lavender. Like with signature strikes, it effectively ranks the likelihood of anyone in Gaza being an enemy combatant using factors like the triangulated location of their cell phone, known associations, posts on social media, as well as a host of other correlations that likely can't even be comprehended by humans. While the IDF emphasizes that all targets have to be approved by humans, in an interview with Ynet, the former IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi has said that these systems have allowed them to go from generating 50 targets a year to 100 a day. And so, as you might imagine, this vetting process hasn't been particularly thorough. In a particularly devastating report by Plus 972 magazine and Local Call, they spoke to IDF soldiers who had personally approved these targets and admitted that their job was essentially just to rubber stamp all of the targets, often only spending around 20 seconds to approve them, during which time they'd basically just confirm that the person was male and then hit OK. But once the targets have passed the rigorous selection process in order to be approved, the information is passed on to another algorithm called Habsora, or the Gospel, which performs a similar analysis as Lavender, but this time for buildings to destroy. The main variable that determines the likelihood of a building being selected as a target is that approved targets from Lavender tend to go there. After this, a third algorithm is used to determine the ideal time to bomb a target's home, i.e. when they're most likely to be there with their families. The name of that one is Where's Daddy? It feels to me like Lavender and Gospel are names that you'd give to things if you're slightly worried about coming off too evil, but for the third one, they kind of just gave up and were like, this one's called I'm Gonna Kill Your Whole Family. Now, to make sense of all this, let's turn to a 2021 book called The Human Machine Team: How to Create Synergy Between Human and Artificial Intelligence That Will Revolutionize Our World. Its central argument is that in order to prevent crime, terrorism, and war, the military and police need to adopt the latest technology by combining human and artificial intelligence. And it's a pretty strange book. For one thing, it's really poorly written. Like, there's one section near the beginning that's just a series of definitions for extremely basic concepts. For example, cyberspace is the domain that includes the staggering number of computers, their human users, and the network connect them. This idea also includes the concept of a cyber war between computers. Internet is the name of the platform of this network between computers. The internet is one of the main things that accelerated big data. The information revolution, sometimes called information age, is a revolution during our lifetime in which a lack of data transformed in today's reality of seemingly infinite data and information. Or a bit later, he explains AI as artificial intelligence is the ability to perform human cognition and to think. This ability refers to the automation of activities that perform functions that require intelligence when performed by people. AI is the reality when a machine can absorb information from the environment, process it, and reorganize it. To think means that a machine can use this reorganized information in order to draw conclusions. Artificial intelligence is the breakthrough in building thinking machines. It is the ability of machines to learn from experience and their ability to infer from learning, to give feedback, make assumptions, and even reach conclusions. But in between poorly written definitions and gushing about the possibilities of AI, you start to notice something kind of weird. Imagine a world in which more than 30% of the population is over age 75. Imagine a world without cancer. Imagine a world where it is difficult to hide the truth. Imagine a world in which more and more of the workplace is comprised of machines. You notice how one of those things isn't like the others? Throughout the book, there are all sorts of passages like this where it seems like for the author, the main appeal of AI is the end of privacy. And speaking of, I think it's about time that I stop burying the lead. The thing that makes the human-machine team so interesting is the person who wrote it, referred to in the book only as Brigadier General YS. Who the fuck is that? Well, the IDF's Unit 8200 is Israel's cyber espionage and warfare division. Their main job is handling the country's SIGINT, that's signal intelligence, meaning they collect, intercept, and analyze electronic communication. They're also responsible for Gospel, Lavender, Where's Daddy, the exploding pagers, and just so much more. Finally, basically anyone who spends time in Unit 8200 is all but guaranteed a very profitable career once they leave and enter the public sector, where they inevitably join one of the kinds of evil startups that we saw in the West Bank. The most famous of these is the NSO Group, a cyber weapons company best known for creating the Pegasus spyware, a virus that they've sold to governments all over the world that can be remotely installed on people's phones and then used to monitor everything they do. Now, despite its prestigious status, a strange thing about Unit 8200 is that the identities of its members are a closely guarded state secret, especially when you get to the higher levels. To give you an idea about how fucking weird this gets, so these diagrams that I used to explain how Lavender works came from a 2023 presentation given by a member of Unit 8200 at Tel Aviv University. And in the video, they can't show the presenter at all. And let me show you how they introduced this guy.
Yoav is a colonel from 8200, head of the Data Science Center. He will share what he can with you. Please don't take pictures, don't record the session, and we will not able to allow questions after that. And if he'll say something that he shouldn't, I'll have to take you all later to a short investigation. So please bear with me. Thank you very much. Yoav?
So I was told that you are not able to take photos. It's good because it's a bare hair day for me.
Very, very normal country. Anyways, bearing all that in mind, and now coming back to the human-machine team, one neat fact is that Brigadier General YS is the title and initials of the former head of Unit 8200 from 2021 to 2024. But there's no way, right? Well, something else about the author of this book is that he's a fucking moron. And I'm not just saying that because of the bad writing, many typos, and poor understanding of the subject of the book. Hell, you could say that about plenty of the scripts for my videos. But see, when we look at the copyright page, we find some very interesting information. For one thing, it was published by a company called eBooks Pro Publishing, which is one of those scam publishers who will put out anything for people who just want to publish a vanity book on Amazon as long as they're willing to pay a bunch of bullshit fees up front. So that's very funny. But also, when we go down to the bottom, we see a contact email. yossi.human.machine@gmail.com. Gotcha. So, Until around a year ago, that Gmail address was registered under the name Yossi Surreal, and not only that, it was tied to this schmuck's Google Maps and Google Calendar. Yossi Surreal stepped down as the head of Unit 8200 in September 2024, claiming that he wanted to take accountability for his failure to prevent October 7th, although a big factor for why he quit, as well as the reason why we know his name at all, definitely had to do with him being stupid enough to dox himself in this shitty book, which, in case you weren't paying attention, he published it the same year he started as the head of a top secret cyber spy agency. On the bright side for Yossi, it looks like we're one step closer to living in his dream world where the truth can't be hidden. But importantly, understanding the author causes a lot of parts of the human-machine team to make a lot more sense. For example, let me just read you the first page. October 27th, 2018, Pittsburgh. At 9:45 a.m., Robert Bowers barged into the Tree of Life with Simcha congregation and murdered 3 people who were in the middle of celebrating a baby naming ceremony. Then he went downstairs and murdered 4 people who were praying. Next, he ran up to the 3rd floor where there was an exchange of fire with police. By the time he was finally subdued, he had killed 11 people and wounded 6. An hour before the attack, Bowers had posted the following on social media. YS, a group that helps refugees, likes to bring invaders in and kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in. Now imagine that an hour before the murderous attack, a red light flashed in the synagogue with a sign that read, "Beware, there's an unfamiliar cell phone in the synagogue compound." Imagine that during the few minutes Bowers was in the synagogue parking lot, a camera equipped with facial recognition identified Bowers, alerted police to an imminent threat, and activated an alarm inside the synagogue for people to stop him. This alarm was based on the reasoning that months prior to the attack, Bowers had blamed Jews for helping migrants, and that he also had a license to carry firearms. Imagine that 2 minutes later, another emergency alarm went out to the police and to members of the synagogue based on his last post on social media that read, "I'm going in." Bowers was not on a watch list of suspected terrorists and was not known to law enforcement. However, he definitely had the potential to be known as a potential terrorist by a team comprised of humans and AI machines that work together. Human intelligence cannot connect the dots and build the profile of a suspect like Bowers, not even 20,000 analysts with 20 million years of time. In addition, machine learning by itself cannot make predictions about Bowers' threat potential or decide to investigate him. However, the human-machine team will lead us to a successful merger of human intelligence and artificial intelligence to address this type of threat in advance. The concept of FAST, foundations, acceleration, and singularity time, will guide us in achieving this ability. So, first of all, one thing that I will give Yossi credit for is that, based off of his horrible writing, it's very clear that he did not use ChatGPT to write this book. It's bad in such a human way that's almost kind of refreshing and charming. But also, just reading that, it makes a lot of sense that this was written by the head of the secret police in an authoritarian apartheid state, right? Like, yeah, imagine that. And then imagine the kind of surveillance apparatus that'd be needed to achieve that. Then imagine all the ways that it would violate people's privacy. Imagine how hard it would be for it to be kept accountable even if it was being used with the best of intentions. Now imagine how it could be abused if it were to be used with the worst of intentions. Now, something that's not that surprising, but definitely pretty depressing, is that despite the premise of the book seeming pretty utopian, Surreal's vision of the future is literally just what's happening in Israel today, except more so. For example, in one section he talks about what he calls deep defense, which is essentially just gospel and lavender, but more. Imagine 80,000 relevant targets that are produced before combat and 1,500 new targets created every day during a war. Imagine that we have the constant ability to know whether the targets are manned with enemy fighters or unmanned. Finally, imagine a reality in which the military has the ability to strike the right target at the right time, destroying the target with the least possible collateral damage. Like, literally, that is just what they're already doing times 10, minus the part about minimizing collateral damage, of course. He goes on to say that this could also be applied to build a smart border or smart area to control the borders, to figure out changes along the border, and to use drones or other robotics in these areas. The human-machine team enables a new potential for using AI to build a smart area for protecting borders. The ability to connect various bits around the border through machine learning can help control and protect these areas. Now, admittedly, it's a little bit hard to understand what he's trying to say there, but I'm pretty sure he's literally just describing Red Wolf. Immediately after that, he argues that AI could be used for disseminating propaganda. In the digital era, truth and falsehoods are mixed. The development of media, and especially social media, contributed to this shaping of reality. Today, everyone can be a kind of media station with their own cell phone. The simplicity of tweeting, posting, and texting causes the influence or shaping effect to be a relevant part of the act of war as well. The shaping effect also has the potential to be a main part of either a victory or a loss. In the era of the human-machine team, it can be much more relevant. For example, machine learning can help create influence in context, which means that different audiences and different individuals will receive the relevant data by the relevant media that has the greatest chance of influencing them. Which, yeah, Israel is infamous for their clumsy social media propaganda featuring pink-washing campaigns or, more blatantly, videos of sexy IDF soldiers doing TikTok dances on the graves of children. Finally, he argues that the modern era has led to asymmetric conflicts in which stronger and larger military forces do not necessarily have an advantage over smaller ones. The human-machine team has the potential to regain the advantage. Finally, bigger, stronger, more well-funded militaries will once again be able to crush smaller ones beneath their boots. Now, let's address the elephant in the room here, which is that as much as I don't want to rely on the argument that AI bad because it can't do thing yet, none of these goals seem particularly realistic to me. And just overall, when it comes to most of Israel's AI weapons, all of them are kind of bad. Like, remember that the justification for all of this stuff always mentions increasing accuracy in order to reduce civilian casualties, but crucially, it absolutely does not do that. A study by Neil Rennick and Elk Schwartz argued that no matter the intentions, these programs are fundamentally incapable of minimizing civilian casualties since their purpose is to expand the pool of targets, not refine it. And the results speak for themselves. Shan Sheikh from the Center for Strategic and International Studies argued that, quote, with over 30,000 casualties in Gaza, it's hard to tell if the IDF is using high-tech AI to identify targets or throwing darts at a map. And Heidi Clough of the UK-based cybersecurity firm Trail of Bits has likewise claimed that, quote, given the track record of high error rates of AI systems, imprecisely and biasedly automating targets is really not far from indiscriminate targeting. But while I understand the impulse to see the claims that these algorithms are there to minimize casualties as just a blatant lie, I think that it actually goes much deeper than that. An apparent belief in the infallibility of AI-generated intel probably shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, given that that's likely what got Israel into this mess in the first place. Something that's pretty well understood in Israel, but I very rarely see acknowledged in Western media, is that October 7th should not have worked. A team of IDF scouts, as well as Israeli residents in the area, both reported seeing increased activity and training exercises being carried out in the weeks leading up to October 7th. And the IDF had even captured partial plans for the attack. However, every Israeli intelligence agency, from the IDF to Mossad to Shin Bet to 8200, knew about this but chose to ignore it due to their belief that their complex AI tools made old-fashioned human intelligence obsolete. And I think that this all raises the question, is the technology failing, or is it doing what it was designed for? I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting conspiracy here, but instead, if we go with the idea that the glitches in technology reveal its underlying logic, I don't think it's at all a stretch to say that the underlying purpose embedded into Israel's technology is to create and perpetuate conflict. And that's exactly what it's done. Thanks for watching.